Well, it's great to see so many people here today. We've got a fantastic day. It's not gale force winds for once. I'd like to welcome you to the first stop here at the Farming Smarter Field School. My name is Nolan Kowalchuk, and just a little bit about me. I was born in northeastern Alberta, north of Vegreville, on a family farm. Grew up, worked in the agriculture industry for 28 years. I've done a lot of different things, working on a whole finance side, the wholesale side of the agriculture industry, and the manufacturer side in the chemical industry. Recently, I've worked for 10 years helping FMC enter Canada and retired in May. So it's great to be back and talk a little bit more about some of my strengths that I worked with, the integrated weed management, resistance management, and so forth. So today, my talk is called Controlling the Controllables. And so what exactly am I talking about? Well, obviously there's, we work in, how many are retail and farmers here? Retail people, if you just put your hand up, or industry, and farmers? Absolutely, okay. So, there's a lot of challenges and things that as retailers working with farmers, as farmers, that we have to manage, right? And there's a lot of things that we can't manage that are beyond our control. The environment, right? The weather, and God knows the last while with the environment and how dry it's been the last number of years, right? It's beyond us, right? Temperature, weather, moisture, hail, pests, disease, market prices, water availability, the type of soil that you have, right? It's kind of, you have what you have and you make the best of it. However, there are things that we can manage. And so tying this presentation back to integrated weed management, I just ask you, so what are the things with integrated weed management, resistance management, killing weeds, just say it bluntly, what are some things that we can do, that we can manage? What's in our control? Tillage, yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? Crop rotation, absolutely. Yeah, and this is it's almost like I planted moles in the audience, but I didn't actually, I promise. But that's exactly it. Those are the things we can control to set our crops up for success. Varieties, seeding rates, holistic other cultural methods of resistance management, chemical controls, time of year, cultural controls, and so forth. So in today's presentation, what I want to cover off is I want to talk a little bit about weed interference and the impact to yield during the critical weed-free period, what impacts extended weed control, and kind of what to expect, and just to have the setting expectations, talk a little bit about resistance management and prevention of resistant weed seed return to the seed bank. And then we're going to kind of end the presentation talking about the benefit of fall management of problem weeds in question and kind of tie that back into resistant weed management. So we do have a number of plots here, and so what we were trying to accomplish, and hats off to Farming Smarter for putting this module together, we were going to have different seeding rates, of peas and wheat, lower seeding rates, increased seeding rates, and then have some herbicide layering examples. Unfortunately, that didn't quite turn out. That trial was across the road. So we, just like as farmers, we have to improvise and we have to kind of act on our feet. So we're going to kind of adapt a little bit and do a little bit of a different presentation here. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at different pea trials here. We have an untreated, we have a glyphosate only, and then we have some herbicide layering examples with some residual products that are tank mixed with glyphosate. Authority, and I'll talk a little bit more about them as I go through the trial. But what we're trying to show here is just with increased seeding rates, and this isn't the higher end of seeding rates, this is 100 seeds per meter squared, so targeting roughly about 195 pounds per acre, and just kind of showing like with a glyphosate only treatment and an increased seeding rate, and then kind of as you get into more tank mixing and the kind of the opportunities you get for better weed control when you're involving kind of all the facets. It's not just about seeding rates, it's not just about herbicide, it's not just about crop rotation, it's putting everything together. So I hope you kind of take that out of this talk. So weed interference and timing of application. When we're looking at pulse crops, peas here for example, the timing of herbicide application is very, very important. Early herbicide application means you got kind of smaller weeds, they're just starting to come up, they're generally easier to control at a younger stage, and the crop is going to be less susceptible to injury. And so when we take it to kind of trying to control kochia, has anybody heard of kochia here? Yeah, it's a bad one. It continues and continues to get worse and worse and worse, right? And 80% of kochia is emerged in the spring. Even 80% of kochia is up before 10% of any other kind of type of spring weeds are up or appear. So it can start to germinate at 50 growing degree days. So what does 50 growing degree days mean? Well, 50 growing degrees, if we go look back at last year, by May 1st, we had already accumulated 100 to 300 growing degree days. So what does that mean? That means by May 1st, kochia was rampant and up and early germinating, right? So it's competing for yield. So research in northern Alberta and Peace River regions have showed, and this is some older research, but I think it's always applicable, right? Has showed pea yields were higher and more consistent with the application at kind of that 2 to 3 node stage compared to kind of that 7-8 node stage, which is beyond most labels as well. And the yield increased anywhere from 25 to 125%, 7 times out of 10. By having that early application. Again, other research that was conducted at Agri-Food Canada and Agri-Arm sites in Saskatchewan, so extension work that's been done, also showed the importance of early weed removal. And in those cases, what they did was they basically planted peas, they let them emerge, and then they removed the weeds 1 week after emergence, 2 weeks after emergence, and 3 weeks after emergence. So 1 week after emergence, after the peas came up and they went and hand weeded the weeds and then took it to yield, there was no impact to yield. 2 weeks, it was 7%. So 7%, equate that to a 50 bushel, 50, 60 bushel, that's 3.5 bushels, right? That you lost, right? Of competition. And as we went into 3 weeks, well, guess what do you think happened? More, 26%. So 26%, we're talking 13 bushels, right? So that's how critical the timing is for weed control. And so when you can do mixing products with glyphosate and extended weed control that's providing you several weeks of control is definitely helping. Yes, sir.
When they hand weeded, did they go back again later on or just hand weeded once in each plot?
I believe in that study they hand weeded once.
Okay. Yeah. And anything came after that first week or second week?
Correct.
Was still
yeah, it was still there. Yeah, good question. You know, talking about cereals, we were supposed to have cereals here, but that didn't turn out. But the one thing I want to mention with cereals, there's been other great studies I think that's important to keep in mind here. There's a study done by Eric Johnson. I'm sure some of you are familiar with him, does some great work in Saskatchewan, University of Saskatchewan now, and worked for government extension work. I believe Dr. Brianne Tideman was involved in this work, and Dr. Charles Geddes as well, kind of amalgamating some of the data. But this data, basically what they showed is they had seeding rates for wheat, 150 seeds per square meter, and then they went to 300, and then they went to 450. So what they saw when they increased from 150 to 450, and what they were measuring was the wild oat biomass. Okay, and so we know, anybody have group 1 and group 2 resistant wild oats? Yeah, I know, it's the way it is. I'm not trying to be a smart ass or whatever, but yeah, so if you can increase that seeding rate, they went from 150 to 450 seeds per square meter. They decreased the wild oat biomass by 68%. Now when they went and increased the seeds from 150 to 450 seeds per square meter, so heavy crop competition coupled with a pre-emergent, right? Guess what happened? That herbicide, or wild oat biomass decreased by 96%. So that's huge, right? When you can involve seeding rates, and that's what I mean when I talk about controlling the controllables, right? Those are things that we all have the capacity to advise our farmers, or as farmers, to execute some of these strategies where it makes sense. Agronomics and economics always have to fit, right? And I get there's environmental challenges and all that stuff, but you know, those are things that can help, and that's like having an extra mode of action in the tank by increasing seeding rates and employing it with herbicide strategies. So now I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about kind of the impacts of extended weed control, what to expect, and setting expectations. So what happens to soil applied products when you spray them? Anybody have a thought? You apply a product like a Authority or a Volterra, or what happens to them when you spray them?
They attach to the soil particles?
Yeah. Anyone else? Or an edge, or a Treflan, or whatever. There's lots of things, right? So they can run off, there's spray interception, there's volatilization, they attach, there's photochemical decomposition from the sun, there's adsorption to organic matter, clay, there's microbial degradation, there's chemical breakdown, there's leaching if you get excessive rain. So what I'm trying to kind of parlay is there's a lot of moving factors with these soil applied products, right? And the availability of the soil applied chemistries that are out there, right, are generally affected by the herbicide itself and the soil. So a soil applied herbicide, kind of the newer generations, the group 14s and 15s, are dependent on the solubility, the rate used, the adsorption, and the decomposition of the herbicide. So in the soil, and then kind of separating the chemical from the soil, the texture, the pH, and the moisture are factors that affect that chemistry as well. So solubility is, you know, all these herbicides have a solubility rating. And so what is solubility exactly? It's measured by milligrams per liter, and it indicates the maximum amount of a herbicide that will dissolve in 1 liter of water. And this varies by active ingredient, because a lot of these soil applied products require Mother Nature, right? They require moisture to wash the product into the soil, mix into the soil water, so that weed seeds germinate. It picks up that active ingredient and kills those weeds as they're below ground or as they're germinating, depending on the chemistry that you're working with. And so some products, like I'll use sulfentrazone for example, is 780 milligrams per liter. So it dissolves quite rapidly. The higher the number, it dissolves more. It doesn't need as much rain to activate. Whereas something like pyroxasulfone is 3.5 milligrams per liter. So it needs more moisture in order to activate so that it mixes into the soil. pH is another aspect that affects these soil applied products. Acidic soils, so low pH soils, bind up the chemistry versus high pH soils, which make that product more soluble and more available for uptake. So these are just factors to kind of keep in mind when you're kind of assessing what rates to use and how to kind of employ those products. I think here we are at about a 3.8% where we're standing right now. We're at a 3.8% organic matter and a pH of 7.7. So generally these soil conditions are actually very positive for soil applied products. When we stand in Lethbridge or southern Alberta, you get to where I grew up, northeast of Vegreville, Willingdon, right, where you got 7.5%, 8% organic matter, about 6.5, 6.6, 6.8 pHs. You don't get that residual control because the products are binding up and so forth. and which kind of talks about adsorption, the physical binding of the herbicide to the soil. Fine textured soils, you're seeing more binding, so you're not seeing, it's kind of taking away from the efficacy because that active ingredient isn't available in the soil. And then you have coarser textured soils where the product is more available in the soil and available for herbicide efficacy, and also providing a longer residual control. Just check the time here. So now I want to just kind of switch gears a little bit and just talk about overall kochia resistance and just a bit of an update, because I know nobody has ever heard of kochia before, so maybe I'll educate a little bit. That's my attempt at humor. So 2021 survey that was done recently, kochia was 100% group 2 resistant. It was 78% glyphosate resistant. So, you know, in a few short years, we almost are at the point with glyphosate group 9s that you can assume that all the kochia is glyphosate resistant. So if we take a look here at this, this glyphosate only plot, and this was 46 days after application, I mean, when you kind of look at the pressure of the kochia here, and you look here, I mean, it's not bad because we increased the seeding rate with glyphosate only, but if you come back here in probably another 2 to 3 weeks, because there's going to be no in-crop here, this is going to be ugly, right? There's going to be kochia coming because it's just full of kochia here. Group 4 dicamba resistance in the 2021 survey was 28%, and Group 4 phylloxipur resistance was 46%. I know I'm full of good news, because then the next part I want to talk about is there's group 14 resistant kochia that's been discovered as well, right? Unfortunately, but it is what it is. In 2022, a population was found in west central Saskatchewan, and multiple resistant populations were found in North Dakota. And then guess what? Alberta never misses out, right? So in 2023, a population was found in southern Alberta as well. That's been kind of confirmed by Dr. Charles Getty's lab as well. So these populations were found and screened for saflufenicel and confirmed resistance. That's the first active that they happened to use. Other foliar products, right? It's not immune, unfortunately, to other group 14s. Foliar products that have been screened and confirmed resistance. So saflufenicel with the trade name HEAT, carfentrazone, the trade name AIM, pyraflufen, which are actives in Blackhawk, Conquer, Goldwing, and Thunderhawk. You know, the nice thing about some of those products is they do have some alternate modes of action in there as well that are working. Tiafenicel, Insight, another group 14 PPO, and trifludiamoxazin and saflufenicel, which the trade name is Viraxor. So those have all been screened and have resistance for group 14 foliar applied. And guess what? Soil applied products don't miss out either on the party. So sulfentrazone in authority products and flumioxazin have similar levels, lower levels of resistance soil applied, but have levels of kochia resistance as well. So there is a lining though, there is a lining in this. I kind of bring in, I can feel the energy dropping in the audience, but there is a lining, right? It's controlling the controllables, right? So resistance development is slower for soil applied herbicides compared to foliar applied herbicides. Soil applied herbicides reduce the intensity of selection for resistance to foliar applied herbicides. So the example is in Ontario from a few years back with PPO resistant water hemp. Now since this discussion and since this talk, they have found soil applied products that are resistant to water hemp as well, just like we have with kochia. But for the longest time, foliar applied products were group 14s were not working on group 14 resistant water hemp, but group 14 soil applied products were controlling group 14 resistant water hemp to the level of susceptible populations. Why is that? What's that?
Just a smaller plant, so it's not as hard.
Part of it. Yeah, you're warm.
Is there a difference in the active as far as how the mode of action is?
Expand.
Well, I mean, you get, for example, take group 1 herbicides.
Yeah.
Basically 3 subgroups. A similar sort of thing in this situation?
So the reason is so you're both right. And the other reason also is due to the fact that the rate that you're using. So foliar applied products tend to be kind of dosed at lighter rates, right? Because it's an emerged weed, where soil applied products are mostly all root uptake, so they're dosed at much higher rates. And so the soil applied products, the higher the rate, you're able to, even though it's resistant, and you still can confirm soil applied resistance, the higher the rate, you're being able to overcome that mechanism of resistance. So I promised a bright spot. The bright spot is not everything's 100% group 14 resistant, right? It's low levels of resistance. So if we keep employing multiple tactics and so forth for targeting these weeds, and so the take home of that kind of whole discussion would be to use the right rate, and the higher the rate that you can, that your soil can safely handle.
But is that the right term then? Should we be using the word resistance or tolerance? Simply because when you look at the classical meaning of the word resistant, that means it's resistant.
Correct. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Like, I guess tolerance would be probably the better word to be using, and less tolerance versus, that's a wonderful point, because I think sometimes we scare people, right? And that's kind of what the point of this discussion is that there's still a bright spot, because we don't have, so thank you for raising that. You know, the tolerance is less, there's more resistance, right, with foliar applied products. And so the thing to be using when you're examining which soil applied product to use is examining active ingredients, grams active, are there cutting rates, are they, you know, and look at those things as agronomists and farmers. So you're using a high enough dosage level of an active ingredient so that if you use a lower active amount of an active ingredient, you're going to probably select for more resistance, right? So that's something that we can do as controlling the controllables, to examine kind of and critique the amount of active that we're using. And I'm not saying use the high rate. You got to use what your soil can safely handle, right? Because these products are very finicky with.
And is this going to evolve over the next few years, where the soil applied products, because the higher rate is going to confer more higher levels of tolerance to the population that's left over?
Well, that very well could be, but if we also employ additive control and other mechanisms of control, increasing seeding rates, cultural practices, patch management, it's not just herbicide, right? And that's a great point. And that's kind of a bit of the discussion here is putting all those tools together. So you know, taking this now, so it's like you read my notes here. So, yeah, exactly. So when we talk about resistance management and the prevention of resistant weed seed to the seed bank, right? Pre-seed burn-off and herbicide layering are crucial, right, for resistance management. Mixing products with glyphosate to provide alternate modes of action while using products. So you have additive control, and then you have extended control to grab, right, all those other weeds that are coming up in later flushes. Herbicide layering is the practice of using multiple active ingredients and herbicide groups to control the same weed but at different application timings. And when developing a resistance management strategy, you need to consider the type of weeds that you are targeting. What timing controls these weeds? You know, if you're after something like, and so that's another part to think of, right? We've been used to the last 7, 8, 9 years of dry conditions and so forth. Well, guess what? We finally got some moisture, but guess what's going to happen? We're also going to get some wetter weeds starting to come, right? Narrowleaf hawksbeard, more dandelion, more Canada thistle, right? Things that we hadn't had to think about because we didn't have great conditions, right? But so some of those weeds are more suited to be controlling in the fall, right? So as those weeds are starting to take nutrients down to the roots, putting products in to take the ride down with those nutrients to control them in the fall is a lot more a better level of efficacy than trying to control them in the spring. And also thinking about what lends itself to you know, the type of crop and what lends itself to better weed control. And I think the question that you got to ask, you know, we got to ask ourselves is, do you have the use of an effective mode of action providing, you know, the control of resistant weeds? But back to the discussion we had a little bit earlier, George, you know, using other mechanisms, salt-tolerant forages can help, right? Farming Smarter has done some great work, you know, with using salt-tolerant forages in saline areas, trying to control kochia and so forth. You know, some of the studies found in the first year it didn't establish, but once it got established, it did some good work. Dr. Charles Geddes and his team also looked at diverse crop rotations, usually summer annuals, rotating between a winter annual, a summer annual like winter wheat, then a summer annual crop, as well as a perennial crop. And so when they put winter wheat into the rotation, they reduced kochia biomass by 64% density and 64% 64% biomass and 74% density in the third year of that rotation. So those are all other things that we can use to help control. And then, you know, the discussion we had a little bit earlier about using non-chemical controls in conjunction with chemistry solutions may also help. Strategic use of tillage, somebody said here. Delayed planting, right? That helps. Increased seeding rates, as we, you know, have a robust seeding rate here. Certified seed, weed-free seed, post-harvest grazing, short-term hay or silage that's baled off to prevent weed seed set. Weed seed destructors, right? There's a lot of research being done on that. Maybe that makes sense. And patch management. And so I'm going to go off on another little tangent here about patch management. I think we don't think enough about that, right? We do such a good job controlling kochia in the crop and so forth, but then you kind of go in the irrigation and you see sometimes in the little areas just quite a bit of kochia, right? And so it's important. Kochia is indeterminate. It will remain green during senescence. You can have a growing parts of the plant, while there can be viable seed on other parts of the plant when it is flowering. And you can see when you see pollen grains starting to develop on that kochia, it's time to destroy that, right? Because it's going to start to tumble, it's outcrossing, and it's got so much genetic viability, resistant, and it can confer resistance so quick. That's why it's rapidly, glyphosate resistance is rapidly increasing. So generally, you see seed production starts in early to mid-August. So it should be mowed, guess what? End of July, right at the beginning of August. And I think that's one thing that we all can kind of just help raise awareness of that. If you cut it down prior to flowering, it could also try to regrow by the end of the year and still produce seed. So if you're going to mow it right at the end of July, then the strategy should be to go back in, say 8 to 14 days after when you got some regrowth, and then spray it so that you don't, because that regrowth can still generate seed. If kochia starts growing or emerging approximately prior to the third week of August, it can still produce viable seed. So if we can get rid of it, mow it, come back in 10 to 15 days, that's kind of the message, and spray it out, we can do a good job. Because kochia isn't like that viable, right? In a year and a half, 2.5 years, that seed only lasts. So if we can kind of throw a lot of things at it, we can get ahead of it, right? So just something to keep in mind. So last but not least here, I want to talk just a little bit about the benefits of fall management of problem weeds. So why should we spray in the fall? Awesome. Yep. You stole my last bullet point. Yes, that's number one. You know, a couple other things that we maybe don't think about as much. Conserving soil moisture, right? And what I mean by that is like there's been lots of academic studies that have been done in the US, and so I found one in the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and it's a study that identified that 800 pounds of water is used when 1 pound of annual weed biomass is produced. So on average, 500 pounds an acre of winter annual weed biomass is produced roughly at the time of a spring planting. So if you do that math, and I'm not going to ask you to do that math, but I did do that math, how much water is that? It's 1.75 acre inches of rain. So when we go back to the last number of years where we had no moisture, I mean, that's just, again, something that we can help control to conserve as much moisture as possible. The other one's preserving nitrogen, right? Kansas State study that was done in 2017 across 14 sites. Basically what they found was winter annual weeds use 16 pounds of nitrogen. Well, last that I knew, nitrogen's not free, right? 16 pounds equates to a few bucks an acre. Is it $3, $4, $6 an acre? But again, it's money that you can use for weed control, preventing resistant weed seed to seed bank and so forth. The other one's decreased, back to the comment that you had made, which is awesome, is decreased weed pressure, or there's a lot of good choices like for weeds like stinkweed, narrowleaf hawksbeard, flicksweed, shepherd's purse, and perennial weeds, right? And we're probably going to start to, if we start to get, and I don't want to jinx it if we get into a little wetter bias, but we're going to start to see some of those weeds, right? And so that fall is a great opportunity, right, to use some of the systemic, and yeah, we got resistant kochia to group 2s, but group 2 systemic chemistries are very, very strong, and as weeds begin to move carbohydrates and sugars and down to the roots, the active ingredient is also taking that ride down, resulting in excellent control of the winter annuals and the perennials. So last couple points here, some key application tips for general additive control for glyphosate when spraying in the fall. Apply to actively growing weeds. So weeds cut at harvest need to accumulate some weed growth, right? You need a little bit of regrowth for proper herbicide uptake. So generally kind of using 6 inches of weed growth as a rough guide. Spraying after a frost. If the tissue is blackened, brown, dark green, there could be cold temperature damage and it will not uptake the chemistry properly. Leaves should be a vibrant green, shiny and pliable and looking for new growth. And timing and weather conditions for additive, putting products in with glyphosate for foliar activity. With non-residual products, spray in the late morning or afternoon when the temperatures are warmer. Heavy dew is off the plant, and try apply when temperatures above 10 degrees are rising and predicting 15 degrees. And I know that's next to impossible, but it's trying to pick the best of the worst conditions that you have. And when it comes for fall tips for extended weed control, apply as the soil temperature are cooling to 10 degrees Celsius or less, because a lot of these extended weed control products are microbial degraded, and so microbial degradation tends to cease or slow down at 10 degrees Celsius or lower. So if you apply these fall extended products, applying them kind of as that soil cools, and if you get moisture, you're not using up kind of that chemistry so that you can kind of bank it into the spring. Apply, generally after a heavy harrowing or a tillage event. If you have, you don't want to harrow, or you don't want to apply these products and harrow because you're disturbing it, and you're going to dilute the product. You're not going to get as good as efficacy. One thing to ask yourself also is consider when you're using extended weed control products, what product are you using? Do the products get bound up by green matter? So if you're targeting residual control, it's important because if you spray a product that you're wanting that residual, but it gets bound up by green matter, guess what? You're not going to have the residual. You're going to get a great burn off, but you're not going to get that residual activity. So just some food for thought. In higher disturbance situations, consider applying in the spring after seeding, or you could have weed escapes in the seed rows. If you have openers, generally I use like 2 inches or wider. If you're going to have a 3.5 inch opener and you apply this product in the fall and you come and seed, guess what? You move the soil to the sides, so you could see weed escapes in the seed row. So this is something else to consider. Good water volumes. Try to apply as much water as possible. Try to be at that 10 gallons. I know farmers hate when you say that, but as much water as possible to get proper coverage, because you might have an additive with that product for foliar efficacy, but also for the soil applied to get proper coverage, so when it does activate, you have a really good blanket coverage. And consider recropping restrictions. How many times a year? A lot of these products have been used in the spring, they've expanded their labels, and now are being used in the spring or the fall. Some can be used every year, some can be used every second year, so that's important to consider as well. And so with that, I am quite proud of myself. I'm right on time. If there's any comments or questions, I think we covered off a lot of areas. I wanted to try keep this kind of to hopefully provide some information that you can kind of use and think about and take home for the stuff that happened in the spring, but also for things that are about to happen at harvest time. You're going to be in your combines, you're going to be seeing any escapes. So just some food for thought to think about things. I'll open up for any questions. Yep.
Shouldn't herbicide be our last line of defense when it comes to weed control? Like, shouldn't we do all the cultural things, planting day, crop rotation, seeding rates, all those things first, and then if we have to, we go in and put I know working for a herbicide company is hard.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I do, but unfortunately, do we do that?
We don't, and that's why I think we're in the situation we are.
Yeah. No, I'm not.
Don't get me wrong. I'm
no,
not against using pesticides.
No, I totally agree with. Don't get me wrong. I totally agree with you. I think that's part of this discussion. And yeah, it's a little bit herbicide heavy, but increasing seeding rates, cover crops like winter wheat, forages, like we don't do enough. And I think some of the research that's done here at Agriculture Canada is fantastic. That Dr. Charles Geddes does, Farming Smarter Group does, of all these different food for thought things, right? Like we don't do enough cover crops. We don't do enough winter, like we grow some of the best winter wheat, and I mean, acres aren't that high. Why is that, right? I mean, it's economics, unfortunately.
And that's the thing. Economics is always going to trump agronomy, right? Any day of the week, right? So
yeah,
that's the thing we have to work with. Yeah.
But no, it's absolutely valid point, right?
I just had a question. Has there been any research done on opener type and influence on weed pressure? So a little bit of background, like, so our dealers,
okay,
they do trials where they'll pull in a disc drill versus somebody that has a hoe style opener. And we generally see more wild oats where they're using the hoe opener. So like our hypothesis is that it's burying the wild oats and it's propagating more weeds. But are you aware of any research that has been done like on a disc versus like a hoe and that impact? Like I know we're doing seeding rates and things like that.
Yeah, I'm not like on some of that research. I'm sure there is. I'm not familiar with it. But I mean, the thing that when you get, like you say, with wild oats, I mean, it can germinate from a long, long way. So there's some of these actives that work more. And so it's a really good point, because that's another aspect that you have to think about. Some active ingredients, if you take a look at peroxysulfone, works on shallow germinating weeds, which means you have a shallow germinating weed, the herbicide barrier is right at the surface. If that wild oat's on the surface, there's higher efficacy. Something like triolate doesn't work that well on shallow germinating wild oats. Flip the page though, and you got irrigation, you're working the soil more so, you're deeper, or you use a higher disturbance type opener, right? Like you're suggesting. Then you have deeper germinating wild oats. So then peroxysulfone is ineffective, right? Because it's not going to be able to control those deeper germinating. But something like a triolate is going to be more effective, right? So, but it's something I'll look into, because it's a great point, I'm sure, and I'll maybe chat with you after, wouldn't mind picking your brain a bit more to learn. As Ken said, we learn from each other, right? So, yes, Catherine.
What about applying like with wild oats? We apply the selective centurion, but we'll apply it we don't. But some people may apply it at higher rates than labeled. Is that making the problem worse or better? And if we apply multiple times, is that worse or better? Like I think we're eventually we have no solution. That's the problem, right?
Yeah. That is, and I think it's unfortunately making the situation worse, right?
Right.
Higher
Don't do it.
rates, but I mean, you
Get the
gotta,
seeds, so.
yeah, and so I think it's a combination of using other actives that you can use for wild oat activity. If you can use the group 15s, take out some of that, and we got to be careful, right? Because there's been like Avidex got reclassified from a group 8 to a group 15. Well, we had lots of resistance way back when, but now all of a sudden it's kind of disappeared a little bit. So these group 50s become valuable to use to take out some of that, and then come back in, and if you can use multiple modes of action, if you can use, right, group 1s, group 2s, switch it up. But back to George's point, silaging, timing, all these like more holistic practices, I think is probably the way that we would be able to get better handle on it. But can we do that? Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't, right?
I think some people, my growers, I know they've been forced into it simply because all the other options didn't work.
Yeah,
Right? It
yeah.
was a last resort. But if we had planned better, but again, economics trumps agronomy. So
But you said a key word there, right? Planning, and that's, I guess didn't mention that as much, but that's probably really key is planning, thinking about those different fields, what type of pressure do you have, and then how can I do things a little bit differently. It's got to make economic sense. Nobody's don't want to be like the snot-nosed kid giving a presentation, and right? And so it's got to make. I grew up in a farm, and you do things because you have to do things, right? But if you can do things slightly different, tweak kind of practices, maybe on some land you can do a third this way, a third of the acres that way, a third another way, right? And just trying to do things and think outside the box a little bit, right?
there's an old term called integrated pest management.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, great discussion. I appreciate all the questions. We're going to have Brian Mercer from Mercer Seeds. They have a door prize, so he'll ask a question. If you want to answer and win a hoodie, then put your hand up and see if you get it right.
Good, thanks Jamie. My name's Ryan Mercer of Mercer Seeds, like Jamie just mentioned. I also want to introduce Justin Knoll up on the trailer. He's also at Mercer Seeds. So if you drive onto the farm, you'll probably find him more often than you find me these days. You know what? I'd like to thank Jamie for all the good work the Farmer Smarter does. It's just amazing every year. You do so much. I don't know how you do it all, but you and your team do great work. And Nolan, I'd like to thank you for your talk. Very informative.
Thank you.
My question to you guys is, and I've got a hoodie for whoever can answer this. 3 things, integrated pest management. I was thinking of kochia, but it could be wild oats. But in general, in terms of integrated weed management, what are 3 things that you can tell me? 3 things that we can do in terms of integrated weed management. So not
Always
just
testing
thinking,
me if I got through to the audience. Oh.
we named a lot, actually. You could, the list is endless, but just 3 general things in terms of planning, like you said, thinking outside the box. Don't just rely on herbicides, but what else? What other things should we do? Sorry? Yeah, exactly. We talked about, like, don't let it go to seed, silaging. Can you think of a couple more?
Spray timing, making
Yeah.
sure that you're spraying when the weeds are at the right stage and controlling it with the right herbicide groups and different locations.
Excellent. Good. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Jump the gun.